After an earthquake, a huge fissure cracked open on the field right outside our home. Later, in that fissure, I found my father, who had been missing for 8 years, a skeleton encased in mud. 2 hours after the earthquake hit, Tina felt a dull, heavy ache in her lower abdomen, but surrounded by a few younger students, she forced the anxiety from her face and looked towards the tents being set up in the distance. David, her husband and the school's principal, was in the middle of a group of seniors, gesturing animatedly. When the earthquake struck, David had been giving her a bedtime massage. The ceiling and furniture suddenly began to shake violently. Without a word, David scooped her up and ran outside, yelling for the other teachers in the faculty housing as he headed downstairs, making a beeline for the school just over the wall. David's decisiveness was well known throughout N-City's education system. In just a short time, he'd already gotten the boarding students and nearby residents settled. The seismic agency had issued a notice more aftershocks were likely tonight. David had the logistics team bring out the emergency tents, deciding they'd camp out on the field tonight, getting the students and residents through the night. All the floodlights on the field were on. In the bright light, Tina could see the back of her husband's t-shirt soaked with fine beads of sweat. She felt a pang of sympathy, but also a rising warmth. Young, successful, and kind-hearted David was her rock, and everyone else's here too. The artificial turf beneath her feet suddenly trembled. Tina's vision went black. She thought she was going to faint. Only when a few female students screamed did she realize it was another significant aftershock. As the earth shook violently, there was a loud tearing sound. David seemed to want to look back to check if his wife was okay, but he saw a strange panic in her eyes. Tina cried out, "Leo!" Leo was a child the former principal had adopted, born with an intellectual disability. After the old principal passed away, David had taken over, raising the boy in the old principal's former home, with several teachers taking turns to care for him. David turned around just in time to see Leo's small, frail body sway a few times and then suddenly disappear. He sprinted over, trying to grab Leo, but only managed to touch the hem of his clothes. This aftershock had torn a huge fissure down the middle of the field, ripping the turf with it. Leo, who had been standing nearby, innocently watching the commotion, had fallen into the crack. It was unclear if he was alive or dead. David's face flushed red, a rare look of panic on his face. He yelled to the teachers at the edge of the field in charge of the lights, "Shine the lights over here." Light as bright as day moved towards the terrifyingly deep chasm. Leo was lying on his side in the trench, about 3 feet deep, covered in dirt and rubble, but he didn't look seriously injured. David stood at the edge of the chasm, just about to breathe a sigh of relief, when he heard Leo let out strange, guttural cries, his grimy hands reaching out towards something just in front of him. The cries were so piercing they startled the already agitated birds nearby, making the post-earthquake field feel even more eerie and terrifying. Following Leo's pointing finger, David and everyone present saw what was in the trench that had frightened the boy. It was a skeleton, encased in mud, but a more or less complete frame was visible. The skull was barely attached to the spine, hanging precariously, trembling in the cold midnight wind as if trying to tell 1,000 stories. Between arranging for the students and teachers and dealing with the suddenly unearthed skeleton, it was 3 days before she saw her husband again. David's clothes, which he hadn't had a chance to change, were stiff with dirt. He went straight to the bathroom to wash up when he came in. Tina brought out a still warm meal from the kitchen, watching with gentle eyes as her husband, his hair wet and face pale, wolfed down the food. After David had finished 2 bowls of rice, Tina finally asked, "Is everything at school sorted out?" "Yeah, classes resume tomorrow. The field will take 2 months to repair, so P.E. classes are cancelled for now. You can take a good rest at home." After graduating from college, Tina had returned to the middle school she'd attended as a child to teach P.E. That green artificial turf had been installed 8 years ago, during her senior year of high school. She had a special attachment to this field where she'd spent so much of her youth, pouring out her sweat. But in these special circumstances, hearing David announce the class suspension felt like a huge relief. What about Leo? He was traumatized. His condition got pretty bad, so we've temporarily admitted him to a psychiatric hospital. The steam and heat from David's body made his loungewear damp with a thin layer of sweat. Faintly, Tina could see various gruesome red scratches on her husband's body, and 2 bite marks on his arm. She didn't need to ask to know he'd gotten them while trying to take Leo to the hospital. The boy must have resisted fiercely. Even though Leo sounded small, he was already a 16-year-old young man, nearly as strong as an adult. Having been under the care of 2 principals, he was almost like a son to David now. Though often not entirely lucid, he was usually very affectionate towards David and Tina. This time, he'd actually scratched David up badly. But then again, anyone who'd gone through the terror of an earthquake and then stumbled upon those eerie remains would be severely traumatized, let alone a child with developmental issues. Tina couldn't bring herself to say anything more. Thinking of the skeleton, Tina knew David didn't want her to ask, but she couldn't help her curiosity. What about the body Leo found? Any progress from the police? All I know is they haven't identified the deceased yet. They're trying to find out who it is. The rest is part of an ongoing investigation and confidential. The police department said they'll notify us if they need assistance, and they'll make an announcement once the case is closed. David put down his bowl and looked at Tina's slightly swollen belly. Don't you worry about any of this. You just need to relax, go for your regular checkups. I'll take care of everything else. I've got this. Those words, "I've got this," Tina had lost count of how many times she'd heard them over the years. Ever since the night she got her college acceptance letter, when her father abandoned her and her terminally ill mother, disappearing to the south, David's simple words and steady gaze had been a constant in her otherwise difficult life. Tina's father, Ben, had also been a distinguished teacher at the school, and David's former homeroom teacher. He'd been an honest, hard-working man his whole life, but at some point, an unknown idea must have taken root in his mind. Perhaps he'd grown despondent from his wife's long illness, or maybe the tuition fees implied by that college acceptance letter were the last straw. He just left his sick wife and young daughter, vanishing without a trace. If David, who had just started teaching at the school back then, hadn't come into her life and told her, "I've got this," Tina didn't know where she'd be drifting in the world today, likely crushed by reality, unable to hold her head high. Thank goodness, she had David. So even if their married life wasn't perfect. She had miscarried twice, one naturally before 3 months, and another was a stillbirth induced at 7 months. This pregnancy was also fraught with anxiety. But as long as David was there, she wasn't afraid. David was always the strong tree sheltering her, her entire emotional support. Did you hear me? Don't be so worried. It's not good for the baby. Her husband's voice pulled her back to reality. Tina forced herself to cheer up, managing a slightly strained smile for David. Half of her worries, David knew the other half, he didn't. This secret had been weighing on her, and she kept hesitating about whether to tell David the truth. But then the earthquake, followed by the gruesome skeleton. Looking at her exhausted husband, Tina just couldn't bring herself to say it. Nothing bad will happen. She loved David. Their deep, long-standing affection wouldn't be hindered by any past complications. On the contrary, facing some things alone was her way of sorting out those old entanglements, for her and David's future. Tina repeated this to herself. She reached for David's bowl, smiling gently. "Let me get you another helping." Tina sat alone in a corner of the coffee shop, lost in thought. The intermittent pain in her lower abdomen still bothered her. It was a familiar pain, one she didn't dare confront. Along with it came cold sweats on her palms and a knot of tension. This anxiety temporarily overshadowed the unsettling pain, allowing her to focus on the people constantly walking into the coffee shop. The person she was waiting for today was a former classmate, her first love, Edward. They hadn't seen each other in nearly 10 years, not since that hasty goodbye at the train station just before freshman year of college started. They had once planned to go to the same college, to turn their unspoken teenage affection into an open relationship. But on that same night she received her acceptance letter, her father's departure and her mother's collapse, requiring emergency hospitalization, changed everything, a choice between her future and life and death. The last time he had appeared in her world was the summer after her father left. Across the bustling platform, she saw his earnest, complicated face looking at her from the crowd. David, beside her, silently stopped Tina from walking towards Edward. She knew, from the moment her father left and David kindly shouldered the burden of her broken family, that her future with Edward was over forever. David, as her father's student, was also somewhat of a childhood friend to her. When he stepped into their lives at that moment, taking responsibility for Tina and her mother, David never said anything explicit, but Tina understood. She knew David wasn't trying to force her into gratitude, nor was he taking advantage of her situation. But naturally, when he offered her his strong hand at her most vulnerable moment, he first became the only lifeline she could grasp in a raging torrent, and later grew into a towering tree, rooted in her heart. So when Edward called her 2 days ago asking to meet privately, Tina's initial instinct was to refuse. With Edward, even if there was a lingering trace of regret from back then, compared to her deep bond with David, it was a negligible ripple. But Edward insisted it wasn't to reminisce, he had something extremely urgent to discuss with her in person. He repeatedly promised not to disturb her life with David and assured her that no one else would know about their meeting. His urgent tone on the phone, eager to see her yet strongly emphasizing secrecy, made Tina think Edward might genuinely be in some unavoidable trouble. So, she finally decided to come alone to this meeting, years in the making. "Sorry, the flight was delayed. Have you been waiting long?" A cool, calm voice interrupted Tina's thoughts. She looked up to see Edward in a white shirt and black pants, looking clean and composed, not much different from his younger self. Edward noticed the loose pink maternity dress she was wearing and said softly, "I'm sorry, I didn't know you were uncomfortable. I shouldn't have asked you to come out." "It's fine." Tina shook her head. "Whatever you need to say it now. It won't take too long, right?" Edward seemed a bit distracted, making small talk about old classmates, which annoyed Tina slightly. "Edward, given our past, it's not appropriate for us to talk alone for too long. David wouldn't like it if he knew, and I wouldn't feel right about it either. You said you had something urgent, so why don't you just get to the point?" Hearing her words, Edward agitatedly stirred his coffee, splashing it around. Finally, with difficulty, he asked, "I heard about the earthquake a few days ago. That a big crack opened up on the school field, and they found a skeleton inside, is that right?" "Yes. You know about that too?" Tina looked at him, puzzled. Even though in this internet age, news of such a strange case would spread nationwide instantly through various media outlets. But for Edward to fly all the way back from G-City just to ask her about this was baffling. "So, do they know who it was?" Tina shook her head. "No, it's still under investigation. Even if they've identified the person, they probably wouldn't announce it immediately." "Why are you asking?" "Tina," Edward put down his coffee cup and, for the first time since he arrived, mustered the courage to look her directly in the eyes, then hesitated. Tina said, "Edward, just say what you need to say. Don't be like this. The past is long gone. I don't have any hang-ups about it, and I hope you. If you're willing, I suggest you go to the police department and ask them to do a DNA comparison between you and that skeleton." Tina, lost in her tangled emotions, was stunned when Edward finally spoke, bringing up something like this. The puzzled look on her face slowly froze. "What do you mean? Are you saying?" "I suspect the person who died under that field is your father." Tina thought she'd misheard, staring at him in disbelief. "What are you talking about? When my dad left, we reported him missing to the police station. Later, we found out he'd left a leave request form at school, and there were records of his ID being used to buy train tickets and for hotel stays. The trail just went cold after he got to the south. Because he was a missing adult, they couldn't officially open a case later on, and we never found him. How could he be connected to a body? I hope I'm overthinking it too. Edward lowered his head. But it wouldn't hurt for you to get a test, right? His DNA probably isn't in any database, and neither is yours. If you get it checked and it's not him, that would be for the best. Seeing he wasn't joking, Tina calmed down. So you heard about the skeleton found on the field, and you came back specifically for this? Edward nodded, his chin sinking lower. Back then, when your family went through that, I didn't keep the promises I made to you. I'm very sorry about that. I've felt guilty all these years. I knew when you had your wedding at home. I even made it to the airport, but I didn't have the courage to come back. Tina sighed. Although this DNA comparison thing is very sudden, I appreciate your concern. I'll think about it seriously. As for what happened before, I barely remember it, really. You should try to forget it too. No. It's not that. Edward suddenly looked up, his usually cool eyes holding more than just nostalgia for the past. That night, I mean the night before Tina's father disappeared. I had asked you to meet me on the field because I knew you should have gotten your acceptance letter too. I went to your house, but no one was there, so I left a little note at the door. Then I waited for you on the field. I waited a long time, and you didn't come. Just as I was about to leave, I thought I saw Tina's father arguing with someone at the edge of the field. It was during summer break, and there was construction going on. I remember hearing the sound of an excavator nearby, rumbling. These past few years while I was studying in G-City, I kept trying to find out news about Tina's father. I discovered something very strange: the hotels that had his registration records back then, none of them recognized his photo, and they had no memory of him ever being there. So I gradually started to wonder, was the person who took that train and showed up in G-City back then really Tina's father? The conversation grew heavier. Tina realized she was facing an unprecedentedly complex problem. She understood. At the time, everyone thought her father had abandoned her and her mother. The police's initial investigation hadn't pointed to a criminal case, so Edward hadn't come forward to say what he'd seen. She also understood that because of their unresolved past relationship, coupled with his guilt, Edward had been relentlessly pursuing the truth all these years, never giving up. If all of this was just Edward's imagination, then life could go back to normal. If not, if the skeleton indeed proved to be her father, then the person who had orchestrated all of this and kept it secret until today was terrifying. As she got up to leave, Tina felt waves of exhaustion. Edward almost reached out to support her, but she gently pushed him away. Before I came today, I didn't know you were pregnant. If I had known, maybe I wouldn't have said all this right now. Tina gave a weak smile. No, it's better that you did. Edward seemed to summon all his strength. Lastly, I still want to ask, that night 8 years ago, did you really not see the note I left? It didn't really matter anymore, not compared to all the life and death, partings and reunions she had experienced over the years, and the truth that perhaps lay ahead, inescapable. But Tina felt she needed to give Edward, who had come all this way, an answer. It was also for herself. No. I did go to the field very late that night, but it was to look for Leo. Later, when I got to the outside of the fenced-off construction site on the field, I saw Leo. I didn't go in, and I didn't see you. David, at home, had clearly been restless for a while due to Tina's unexpectedly late return. Seeing Tina come back looking pale and defeated, he rushed to hug her. What's wrong? What did the doctor say? The doctor didn't say much. Everything's normal. David breathed a sigh of relief. I was so worried that something was wrong with the baby again. Tina cut him off. Honey, do you think? Dad? Is he still alive? David's hand froze. He asked, surprised, why are you suddenly asking about this? Tina's eyes welled up a bit. I was just thinking, that skeleton they found on the field. Someone's husband or son, just buried there all alone, nobody knows who he is. We haven't heard from Dad in so many years. Could he also? Tina. David sounded a little angry. I know you miss your father. So much has happened these past few days, and I've been too busy to look after you and the baby properly, so your mind is racing. But right now, the baby is the most important thing. Look at everything we've gone through for this child. You've suffered so much. Promise me, don't let your thoughts run wild. Focus on the baby. We can talk about your father's situation later, when we have the energy, okay? Tina's eyelashes cast a shadow on her face as she nodded sadly. Okay. I remember you organized some of Dad's old letters and papers. Are they still around? If I miss him too much these days, I'd like to look through them. David sighed. They're all in the low cabinet at the back of the study. But if they're just going to bring up unhappy memories, promise me you'll try not to look at them too much, okay? Tina obediently agreed, her eyelids already heavy. As David helped her towards the bedroom, he murmured, You're not hiding anything from me, are you? Did you hear something about Dad? Maybe something happened to him in the South? Don't keep things from me. No. Tina said evasively. The intermittent pain in her lower abdomen became constant, and she felt waves of dizziness. A week later, DNA testing confirmed a 100% probability that the deceased in the field was biologically related to Tina. It was Ben. We're leaning towards this being a crime committed by an acquaintance. So, we advise you to keep the news that the deceased is your father confidential for now. The police officer in charge of the case looked at the worried pregnant woman before him and couldn't help but sigh softly. Tina pinched the flesh between her thumb and forefinger tightly to counteract the pain in her abdomen. The excavator driver in charge of the field construction back then. Can he still be found? The officer hesitated, then thought for a moment before saying, the construction crew back then had several excavator drivers. Are you referring to Greg? Tina said softly, taking a small file folder from her canvas bag. If I remember correctly, there was someone by that name. And in here is some information that might be useful. I hope it helps the investigation. For another prenatal checkup, David specially took the day off to accompany Tina to the hospital early in the morning. Before leaving, Tina took a call in the bathroom. After a long silence, David heard the click of the lock. Honey, what's wrong? Leo usually listens to you. Why did he react so strongly that day when he saw the skeleton, scratching you up like that? Tina suddenly asked this question, and David couldn't help but shiver. My entire senior year of high school, I remember Mom was always going to the hospital for checkups, and Dad took leave more than once. Later, those requests needed special approval from the principal. You were the principal's assistant back then. All those leave request forms, they were submitted to you, right? The two questions seemed unrelated, but David calmed down and slowly answered, yes. The night before my dad disappeared, a neighbor asked me to go to the school to find Leo. I happened to run into you guys at the entrance to the field, do you remember that? Yes. That was right after something happened to my dad, wasn't it? Maybe you and Greg had just buried my dad under the foundation. Maybe he wasn't dead yet. Maybe he even heard my voice. Through the door, David could hear Tina's choked sobs turn into low, hoarse crying. They seemed like completely unrelated questions. David gave a bitter smile. He knew this day would eventually come. When did you start suspecting me? David asked softly. Actually, this past month, he hadn't been without his own suspicions. He'd wondered if the truth was about to come out, if there had been a slip-up somewhere. But although Tina had been down, she had shown no cracks, giving him no opportunity to broach the subject. During our honeymoon, we used your bank statements for a visa application. I seem to recall a transfer in there, to someone named Greg. At the time, it just seemed vaguely familiar. Only later did I remember who that was. David was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "You just asked about the leave request forms. The ones in the study, you've already taken them, haven't you?" Tina seemed a little surprised, pausing before asking, "I thought you would have looked for them already." I thought about it, whether you might find them when you said you were going to look at your father's old things. But I never actually went to look. Even David himself didn't know if he had been careless, or if he simply hadn't wanted to face this long-buried secret. That leave request form was re-examined. The ink from the main text and the ink from the date weren't the same. There's also a time difference of about a month or so. Which means the date on the leave request was added later. After confirming the skeleton's identity, the police checked the time Ben bought train tickets to the south. Around the same time, David had also traveled to the G-City area, supposedly for tourism. After traveling almost the same route as Ben in the south, David returned to N-City. It was after this that David produced the leave request form, indirectly proving that Ben had left voluntarily, dispelling the police's initial suspicions and quickly leading to the decision not to open a case. Why would you do that?" Tina trembled all over, looking desolately at David's shadow on the door glass. Ben had mentored David. Her father had helped him get a teaching position at the school. And it was thanks to Ben's relationship with the old principal that David had been promoted faster than his peers. Tina didn't understand why her husband would do such a cruel thing to her own father. David said softly, "At the time, a provincial inspection was scheduled for the next semester, and the field renovation had to be completed immediately. But your father received complaints from parents saying the construction company we chose was unqualified, and there were problems with the quality of the foundation and the artificial turf. They demanded work be stopped for rectification. I kept begging your father. He was in charge of academics, not construction, not to keep pushing this issue. He wouldn't listen to me. He was pressuring me too much. That night, for some reason, he came to the school and ran into Greg, who was working secretly on the field. He called me to the site and said if I didn't stop work immediately, he would report the corruption involved to the relevant authorities, that he was going to the disciplinary committee the next day to report me and others. I got desperate and I'm not lying. When the excavator pushed him into the foundation pit, he was fine, nothing was wrong with him. Seeing him struggling in there, I softened. I told Greg to stop working. I really don't know what happened after that. Later, Dad. Tina's father disappeared. The next day, Greg came to me in a panic, saying that after I left, he'd rushed to get more work done. He thought he'd heard some movement under the pile of dirt at the time but didn't think much of it. Then he started to wonder if there'd been an accident, if your father had been buried underneath. By then, what was done, the pit had already been filled. I figured there was no other way, so I fabricated those clues later on. Tina covered her ears. Enough, she handed her phone to David. For the sake of our marriage, the only thing I can do for you now is let you turn yourself in. I figured. David looked relieved, a faint smile playing on his lips. I've arranged everything at home. The divorce papers are in the study drawer. I'm sorry. Everything we built these years, it was ultimately fake. I regret what happened 8 years ago, but as for you and me, I don't. Tina cut him off, her eyes now tearless. Let's end it here. The police car, carrying David in handcuffs and shackles, sped away. Tina leaned against the doorway of the house they had lived in since they got married, feeling as if she were in a different world. A dark cloud completely obscured her vision. Her knees buckled, and blood gushed from between her legs. Before getting into the car, David had insisted on saying one last thing, but my feelings for you, they're not out of guilt because of Tina's father. I truly love you." Everything fell into dead silence. A year and a half later, David's case for the murder of Ben went through 2 trials. The final verdict was a death sentence with a 2-year reprieve. Before being transferred to serve his sentence elsewhere, at David's request, Tina returned to N City from another province for a unique prison visit. "I heard that at first, you didn't admit to murder, only that it was an accident. Why did you confess later?" The forensic report showed clear signs of blunt force trauma to the back of Tina's father's head and neck, a typical homicide. That being the case, someone had to confess. "Whether it was me or Greg, I think it makes a difference in sentencing, but for you and me, it doesn't really change anything." David, standing before her, was filled with remorse. He looked deeply at Tina. She was wearing a jade lotus charm bracelet he had never seen before. David smiled. "You and Edward, you're finally together?" Tina averted her gaze. The bracelet was indeed a gift from Edward. He said it was a gift 9 years late. He had also accompanied her back from G City this time. But facing David, she felt no pity and saw no need for any extra explanation. "I later had a pathology analysis done after my last miscarriage. The doctor said my recurrent miscarriages were caused by long-term exposure to excessive formaldehyde." David's eyes dimmed. The brief light that had come into them with Tina's arrival faded back to a dull gray. Because of David's greed, that substandard field remained. So, in a moderately sized, not particularly rare earthquake, a fissure opened in the ground, exposing Ben's body, the net of justice, vast and inescapable. And Tina was a PE teacher, so she had the most contact with that toxic field. Thus, she suffered the most, the price being the 3 children she and David lost. Things in this world are fair. For Tina, perhaps it was even a blessing not to have a child with her father's killer. "The reason I came to see you was to tell you that my father isn't the only life on your hands. For the rest of your life, I hope you can use it to atone. Goodbye." Before leaving N City, Tina went to the psychiatric hospital. She'd heard Leo's condition had stabilized a lot, and he was clamoring to see her every day. Sure enough, seeing Tina, Leo was very excited, constantly pulling at the caregiver, seemingly wanting to give Tina something. "He knew you were coming, so he asked us to go to his old house and get some kind of treasure box, no idea what's in it. We didn't have time, so we had a neighbor call a courier to deliver it. They just said it's been delivered downstairs. If it's convenient, could you go pick it up yourself?" "Okay, sure," Tina replied. Coincidentally, Edward had also said he was done with his errands and was waiting for her outside the hospital. She thought she'd ask him to come up too. Tina didn't know that as she took the elevator down, she just missed Edward, who was coming up the stairs. Edward reached the doorway of the ward and saw only Leo and the caregiver inside. "Hello, Tina should have been visiting here just now, right? Where is she?" Seeing another visitor, the caregiver beamed. Tina went downstairs to get something. "Are you here to see Leo too? I need to get medication for the patient next door. Could you please watch him here until Tina gets back?" Only Edward and Leo were left in the room. The boy quietly looked at the scenery by the bed, indifferent to Edward's presence. "Leo, do you remember me?" Leo stared out the window, silent. Edward, unwilling to give up, waved his hand in front of him. Leo turned his face away, not even looking, and asked softly, Where's Tina?" "Good, you don't recognize me." Edward couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He had deliberately timed his arrival and taken the stairs, hoping for a chance to interact with Leo alone. He wanted to know if Leo could still recognize him. That night 9 years ago, Edward hadn't found Tina waiting for him at the edge of the field. Instead, Ben had shown up. "I knew it was you, you little brat, stirring up trouble." Tina is usually so obedient, but this time she's stubborn as a mule, insisting on applying to college in Beijing. Her mother could pass away any day, and she's our only daughter. Let me tell you, she's only going to study in state. Going to Beijing with you? Don't even think about it. Ben's usual stern demeanor resurfaced. Edward was scared, but he stiffened his neck and retorted. Tina's father, this isn't just up to you. It depends on what Tina wants. When she gets here, I'll talk to her directly. Kid, don't be foolish. If it wasn't Tina's idea, how would I know to find you here? She applied to the teachers' college in the state capital, not Beijing. When she was filling out her preferences, Tina already decided to listen to me. She didn't tell you because she was afraid you little punk, wouldn't be able to handle it. Now she asked me to come and make things clear on her behalf. From now on, you two go your separate ways. Don't you dare bother her again, I'm telling you. Edward wanted to argue further, but Ben saw the excavator on the field start rumbling to life and walked away, muttering curses, leaving him there. Edward hid behind a pile of cement bags, watching Ben arguing heatedly with David in the distance. 3 years of resentment welled up in him. Ben was a good father and a conscientious teacher, willing to go head-to-head with his most prized student for the benefit of other students. But he was also a stubborn, old-fashioned middle-aged man. As a teacher, he controlled everything about his students. And now, he was interfering in his and Tina's relationship, trying to personally snuff out their budding romance. After the heated argument, Ben was knocked into the ditch by Greg with the excavator. Edward, hiding in the shadows, felt a secret thrill. If this old geezer died, then his future with Tina would be free of obstacles. And the resentment built up from 3 years of Ben's oppressive and harsh methods seemed like it would finally be avenged. However, David must have said something to Greg, because the excavator stopped and backed up. Ben, dazed, poked his balding head out from the pit. The thrill Edward had just felt turned into disappointment. Why did David stop halfway? Why didn't Greg just crush Ben outright? The rush of blood to his head made Edward lose his senses. In that instant, he felt this annoying old man had to die. Then a thought struck him: David already had the intent to order a killing. If he secretly finished the job for David now, as long as the body was buried well and not discovered, it would be done without anyone knowing. Even if the body was found, he could still blame it on David. He just hadn't expected the crime to come to light so many years later. Just when he thought Ben had been gradually forgotten and no one cared about his whereabouts anymore, an earthquake exposed the body buried all those years ago. When Edward saw the news about the skeleton, he felt only a fleeting moment of panic. It wasn't too late to implement the plan from 9 years ago. He couldn't just wait for the police investigation to shift suspicion onto him. Edward decided to take the initiative, find Tina, and deliberately leak clues pointing to David as the murderer, making the attempted killer his scapegoat. However, Edward also hadn't anticipated that, with today's meticulous investigative techniques, David could have potentially denied everything based on some loopholes in the crime's execution. But because of his guilt towards Tina, David confessed readily to intentionally killing Ben, making it much easier to shift the blame. Edward further hadn't expected that, after nearly 10 years of twists and turns, this would also bring Tina back to his side. And now, Leo, the world's only witness to the event, had no memory of him, indicating that Leo hadn't seen his brief act of murder back then. All of this, perhaps, was fate. Destiny had been kind to him. Hey, Edward, why didn't you answer your phone? I was waiting downstairs for you for ages. Tina's gentle voice came from behind, immediately pulling Edward back from his thoughts. Leo took the box from Tina's hand, rummaged inside, pulled out a light cyan object, and, babbling excitedly, handed it to her. The caregiver had sharp eyes. Pointing to Tina's wrist, she said, "Tina, that looks like a matching piece to your bracelet." Tina looked closely. It was indeed identical to the bracelet Edward had given her. It had clearly been around for a while, and possibly played with by Leo. The surface color had faded a lot, making it look very old. Edward had said, "This bracelet is a gift 9 years late." Back then, David had said, "I don't know why Tina's father suddenly appeared on the field." Edward had also said that he left a note that night, asking her to meet him on the field, and waited there for a very, very long time. Tina had indeed never seen the note on her door, because someone had taken it before she got home. When her father was alive, he had always strongly disliked Edward and had vehemently stated he would never let them apply to colleges in the same city. He wanted to separate them in college. So, at the time, she thought she would also receive an acceptance letter from a college in Guangdong. In reality, she had been accepted to one in the state capital, which was one of the reasons she later couldn't bring herself to say goodbye to Edward. And Edward, who had disappeared for 8 years, suddenly asked to meet her the day after the skeleton was discovered on the field. All of these things formed a terrifying chain, making Tina freeze, her temples throbbing. Leo reached out his hand to Edward and said, word by word, "Big brother, you dropped this on the field that night. I picked it up for you. Now, you can give it to sister."